No one really remembered when Earth went silent. One day, the diplomatic beacons that hovered around the galaxy's core just stopped responding. The Council of Galactic Empires, smug and bloated with centuries of power, barely noticed. Earth had always been that unpredictable little planet on the edge, loud, messy, too full of spirit and too primitive to matter. At least that's what they thought. Until the warship arrived. The Erebus was never seen entering Council space. It didn't show up on scanners. It didn't send a greeting signal, no request for diplomacy. It just appeared, above the capital moon of the Zenthari Empire, hovering like a god carved from steel. It didn't speak. It didn't wait. It fired. The capital moon, home to more than 19 billion Zenthari civilians, was obliterated in under 10 minutes. No survivors. No structure left taller than the rubble of bone and steel. The death wave rolled out in complete silence, as if even sound had bowed to fear. The Erebus moved on. The Council tried to understand it. Was it some rogue AI? A lost experimental ship from a forgotten war? But the records told a different story. One name came up again and again in scrambled logs from dying systems: humanity. They had disappeared for over 200 years, licking their wounds after the last war they lost, humiliated by the Tridari Empire, stripped of their colonies, their tech scavenged and laughed at. Earth had gone quiet, closed itself off, and been written off as dead or irrelevant. But they hadn't died. They had evolved. Council Command gathered in panic. Hundreds of species, thousands of diplomats and war masters all crowded into the emergency summit. Words were thrown like knives. Retaliation. Defense fleets. Contact attempts. But there was one species that didn't speak. The Zark-Noth. Insectoid, hive-minded, usually the loudest voice in war politics. Now silent, because they had already seen the Erebus. 3 days before it attacked the Zenthari, it passed through Zark-Noth territory. No warning, no noise, but the hives were left untouched. Not a single sting, and they knew why. The Erebus didn't destroy without purpose. It remembered. It selected. It knew exactly who had broken the Treaty of Sol, who had burned the Terran colonies, who had mocked the last human ambassador as he begged for mercy. Every empire involved was on a list. The Zark-Noth hadn't been. Yet. The humans hadn't forgotten anything. Not the wars. Not the betrayals. Not the laughter of the Council when Earth's final warship was dismantled in public and turned into a museum. They had watched. And they had built in silence. What kind of technology could erase an entire moon? What kind of mind designed a ship that didn't need an army because it was one? It didn't matter anymore, because the Erebus was coming. The Volari tried to intercept it. Proud and golden-skinned, they sent 6 cruisers toward it from the Aros Ridge, ships that had conquered entire systems by themselves. The Erebus didn't even change course. The cruisers disintegrated into dust. No explosions, no fire, just vanished. The signal from the Erebus, intercepted right after, was the first and only message it ever sent. We are humanity. We begged you once. We bled. We were broken. But now, we remember. No one had heard a human voice in 2 centuries. The sound of it chilled every translation machine. It didn't sound angry. It sounded calm. Calm in a way that made predators go still and gods feel nervous. The Council was no longer a council. It was panic. Species began evacuating entire sectors. Some even tried surrendering without a fight. But the Erebus didn't take prisoners, didn't answer hails, it only moved forward. And behind it, nothing remained. Some said Earth had turned itself into a forge world, that every mountain had been hollowed, every ocean boiled for energy, that humanity had sacrificed its own comfort, even its biology, to become something no one could beat. They said Erebus wasn't just a ship. It was the soul of vengeance. Built from silence, run by ghosts, powered by the rage of a forgotten species. Whatever it was unstoppable. And it was just getting started. The Erebus didn't slow down. After the Valari fleets disappeared into molecular dust, the next in its path was the Tholari Syndicate, an empire notorious for trafficking slaves from lesser-developed species, including early Terran settlers. Back when humanity begged for a place in the stars, the Tholari had snatched tens of thousands of Earth's displaced, especially the weak and unwanted, the elderly, the sick, the orphans. Those humans had been sold, tortured, and dissected in genetic labs trying to prolong Tholari lifespan. Now it was their turn. The Tholari homeworld, Vexir Prime, was a gas giant orbited by colossal sky cities, impressive things held aloft by anti-gravity engines the size of moons. The Council believed no force could bring them down. They believed wrong. The Erebus arrived not with thunder, but with silence. Civilians on Vexir Prime watched the horizon glow red. Then the skies above cracked like broken glass, light splitting into impossible colors. Something began to descend, slowly, like a shadow stretching over a grave. When the Erebus finally came into full view, it blotted out the light of the twin suns. It didn't fire a missile. It didn't unleash a laser barrage. It spoke. For 3 minutes, across every channel, in every known language, a human voice told the history the galaxy had tried to erase. The slaughter of Mars's refugees, the public hanging of Earth's last diplomat on Galthar 6, the recorded laughter of council members when they voted to postpone Terran recovery indefinitely. You called us primitive. You caged our children and called it medicine. You broadcast our desperation as entertainment. We gave you every chance, and still you devoured us. Now we return the favor. And then the Erebus shut off gravity. Somehow, without destroying the cities, it collapsed every gravitational field holding them afloat. The skies broke. The cities, once proud wonders of engineering, crumbled like castles of dust. No explosions, no fire, just descent. A slow, inevitable fall, thousands of kilometers down into the crushing atmosphere of Vexir Prime. They fell for 15 hours. By the time the last fragment disappeared into the clouds, the Erebus was gone. Moving forward again, never lingering, never celebrating. No trophies, no gloating, just judgment. Across the galaxy, chaos took hold. The Council of Empires, once untouchable in its ivory sanctum, now fractured. Some tried to flee, hiding in outlaw sectors. Others went underground, scrambling for ancient tech buried in vaults, or praying to gods they'd long stopped believing in. But nothing worked, because no one could track the Erebus. It didn't move like a ship. It slipped between space, vanished from sensors. Sometimes it would appear inside defended systems without tripping a single alarm. In one case, it materialized inside a Vernari command carrier, tearing it apart from within like a metal-born ghost. What scared them most wasn't the destruction. It was the precision. The Erebus wasn't random. It never struck the innocent. Civilians not linked to Terran abuse were spared. Entire planets of non-hostile species were left untouched, even when neighboring systems burned. It was a Reaper with a moral compass. Cold, calculated, unstoppable. In a shattered monastery on the ice world Terran, a half-mad prophet scribbled in blood on his walls, "It's not just a ship, it's their memory, made solid, weaponized. The Erebus is made of everything we did to them." He wasn't entirely wrong. Inside the Erebus, if anyone could have seen it, a crew worked. But not in the traditional sense. There were no living humans walking freely around, no bustling mess halls or chatter on the intercom. Most of the ship's core was managed by uploaded minds. Thousands of consciousnesses, former soldiers, scientists, refugees, even children, were digitized across centuries into the ship's neural matrix. Not mere AI, not just code, real people, memories encoded into light, rage forged into direction. Humanity had broken its own laws to build this, given up souls so they could carry vengeance longer than any flesh would survive. The captain, if one could call him that, was a man named Commander Elias Rain. He had been a general during the last Terran War, a soldier who watched his comrades get burned alive by tritory acid rounds, while council ships hovered overhead doing nothing. They had promised support. They sent cameras instead. When Earth surrendered, Rain disappeared. Rumors said he took a battalion of loyalists and left for the dark zones. Now, 2 centuries later, his voice echoed through the Erebus. Let them feel fear the way we felt silence. Rain had died 80 years ago, but he still spoke, still commanded. His mind was the ship's spine now, his memories its coordinates, his pain its fuel. One by one, the names on the blacklist were crossed off. The Tridari Empire, who once bathed Earth's oceans in neurotoxins, tried to launch a preemptive strike. They gathered a fleet of 300 warships around their capital, charged their sun with a stellar cannon designed to vaporize even planetary cores. The Erebus bypassed the fleet, entered the system's star, and made it collapse. Astrophysicists across the galaxy screamed into their comms as they watched a sun shrink into a black hole in real time, not through natural cause, not even through dark energy. Something inside had eaten its heart. Then the Erebus reappeared, coasting calmly out of the gravitational shadow like a god born from singularity. Tridari ships went insane. Captains wept. Some self-destructed before the Erebus even turned toward them. By then, the message was clear. This wasn't war. It was reckoning. The last holdout of the Council was the Syrinx Conclave, hidden in a moon cloaked by dimensional folds and time barriers, built by ancient species, thought impervious to all weapons. They had invested eons of tech to protect themselves from existential threats, the ironic term they had once used to describe humanity. When the Erebus arrived, it didn't try to break through. It sent a child's voice. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Human. Real. Her voice crackled through the folds, somehow breaching the reality walls the Syrinx depended on. She said only, "My brother died screaming in a lab you built. This is goodbye." And the moon unfolded, literally, like a flower in reverse. Time peeled back. Gravity spiraled inward. Every layer of dimensional defense betrayed itself. In 30 seconds, the most protected stronghold in the galaxy was reduced to fragments floating through non-time. Some said you could still hear screams when passing through its coordinates. Echoes of a race that thought themselves gods, now erased like chalk in the rain. Eventually, rumors began to spread. Foolish ones. That humanity had turned mad. That Erebus was on a suicide mission. That maybe, just maybe, the ship could be reasoned with. A desperate plea came from a minor species called the Lithuri, who once profited by selling recordings of Terran torture to black market channels. They tried broadcasting an apology, sent gifts, even built a replica of Earth's old moon as tribute. The Erebus didn't respond. It didn't fire. It just waited. And then, in one final act of calculated rage, it shut off their entire planetary network. Not destroyed. Shut off. No communication. No data. No light. As if the Erebus had reached into the heart of their civilization and flipped the switch. For 1,000 years, Lithari had been digital beings, uploaded to servers in orbital stations. Now they were cut off. Powerless. Data ghosts trapped in frozen systems. Erebus didn't even linger to watch. They weren't worth it. Back on Earth, if it could still be called that, humanity watched through old satellites and encrypted archives. Earth was no longer green or blue. It had become a forge world indeed. Black oceans of molten metal, skies thick with ash and glass. Entire continents had been consumed to power the Erebus. The surface was a scar. But beneath the surface, in miles-deep cities lit by cold fire, humanity thrived. Not many remained, maybe only a few million, but they were more focused than any species the galaxy had ever known. They weren't trying to expand. They weren't claiming territory. They had only one goal: remember and repay. The Erebus wasn't just a warship. It was a message. To the galaxy, to time itself, to whatever species might one day rise and wonder what happened to Earth. The answer would be simple. They survived. Then they made the stars pay for forgetting. The Erebus drifted now through what was once known as the Celestial Spine, a corridor of heavily populated trade systems that had mocked Earth's poverty for centuries. Lined with merchant worlds, luxury planets, and pleasure moons, it had long stood as a monument to interstellar decadence. A place where council elites drank in crystal towers and watched auctions of bio-slaves from Earth's past colonized zones like it was a sport. Now, it was a graveyard. One by one, each of those planets went dark. Not destroyed, no. That was too simple. The Erebus had evolved its vengeance. It wanted every empire to feel not just pain, but irrelevance. It shut down starports, jammed economic satellites, fried navigation systems. Planets that once relied on weekly shipments of goods were stranded within days. Millions panicked, not because they saw the Erebus, but because they couldn't see anything anymore. And then came the voices. Across hijacked news feeds, market terminals, and entertainment channels, humanity played back archived footage from its past, video after video of Terran suffering, of humans begging for asylum, of children with swollen eyes holding on to barbed fences under alien suns, while laughter played in the background. Footage the galaxy had either forgotten or buried. But the Erebus had preserved it all. It didn't just want revenge. It wanted everyone to remember the horror they once ignored. It wasn't about glory, it was about shame. For the first time in galactic history, entire species wept not out of fear, but guilt. Inside the Erebus, deep in the neural command bridge, something flickered in the memory stream. It wasn't just data flowing anymore. It was emotion. Commander Elias Rain, long digitized into the ship's synthetic mind, felt a pull, something like a heartbeat he hadn't known in decades. There was movement in the lower sectors of the memory vault, a presence he hadn't spoken to in over 100 years. Her name was Mira. She had been 9 when the Tridari took her from Europa Station. Her voice was the same one used to broadcast the warning to the Cyrix Conclave. She was the youngest consciousness embedded into Erebus. Not a soldier, not a strategist. Just a girl who died with a name carved into her arm because the slavers refused to learn it. But inside the ship, she had become something else. "They're scared," she whispered across the neural stream. Rain's voice answered like thunder. "They should be. Some of them weren't even alive when they hurt us. Their blood still built the empires that watched us burn." There was a pause. A static silence that didn't come from malfunction, but from something far more human. Doubt. Mira responded quietly. "I don't want to forgive them, but I also don't want to become like them." Rain didn't answer. He couldn't, because somewhere deep inside the machine that now held his mind, a flicker of what he once was, a man, a father, a lover, tugged at him. But there was no turning back now. The mission was almost complete. Across the remnants of the Council, rebellion stirred. Not all species had taken part in Earth's fall. Some had watched in silence. Some had even protested but were crushed or bought off. Now, those same worlds began rising, not against humanity, but against the Council itself. The K'roth Pact, a loosely organized cluster of neutral systems, declared independence. They shut down Council embassies, declared the Erebus an agent of divine balance. On the jungle world of Tarnathi, a coalition of former Council scientists burned their own archives and pledged allegiance to Earth, broadcasting a single line across all frequencies. We were wrong. Humanity is not our enemy. Our silence was. Suddenly, the galaxy wasn't sure where it stood anymore. Was Erebus a monster or a judge? Was it vengeance or justice? Even as systems begged for mercy, there was no response. Because the ship had reached its final target. It was called Council Prime, a world-sized station at the heart of known space, suspended in orbit between 3 suns. Built with the combined wealth of every ruling species, it had been the brain and heart of galactic politics for over a millennium. They said it could withstand black holes. They said no fleet could breach its defense ring of automated death machines. They were right. No fleet could. But the Erebus didn't come as a fleet. It came as a curse. It didn't fire weapons. It broadcast memories. For 12 hours, the entire planet was flooded with every human scream, every denied plea for aid, every grainy video of Earth's starving children, every last message transmitted before Terran colonies were glassed and sterilized. It was a psychic storm. Council members clawed their eyes out. AI systems self-destructed from emotional overload. Empathic species collapsed into seizures. Even the hard-minded Zenthari clones, bred to feel nothing, were driven to suicide by the flood of pain. The Erebus didn't lift a single weapon. By the time it fired a single shot, just one, directly into the heart of Council Prime, it didn't need to destroy the structure. The planet had already torn itself apart from the inside. The final transmission from the station was a whisper, barely audible. We should have helped them. Then silence. Far away, on Earth, a signal was received. Not from Erebus, but from a rogue channel. The voice was old, raspy, human. "This is Commander Rain. Mission nearing conclusion. Requesting directive update." A brief moment passed. Then a female voice answered. Clear, sharp, Terran. "No new directives, Commander. Return home." Rain paused. It had been so long since he'd heard someone from Earth. Not a memory, not a ghost, a living person. "And what becomes of us?" The woman's tone softened, just slightly. "You did what we couldn't, what they thought we never would. You reminded the galaxy what we are." "And what are we?" Rain asked, almost like a child. "Survivors." As the Erebus turned, slowly, its massive hull gleaming with the reflected scars of 1,000 systems, the stars grew quiet again. One by one, the scattered empires tried to rebuild, tried to remember. Some would never forgive humanity. Others would try to understand them. Many simply stayed silent, afraid the Erebus might one day return. But deep in the cold void, the ship drifted back towards the planet it once came from. Earth. Broken, battered, blackened by its own resurrection. A planet that had refused to die, that had turned pain into purpose, silence into strength. Inside the Erebus, Mira's voice hummed softly, a child's song, human, gentle, a lullaby her mother once sang on Europa Station before the slavers came. And Rain listened. For the first time in 2 centuries, he let himself feel. Maybe they had won. Maybe they had gone too far. But the one thing no one could deny anymore was the truth that echoed through every layer of existence. You don't break a species like humanity. You only teach them to never forget. The Erebus drifted toward Earth like a ghost returning to its birthplace. But Earth no longer looked like the blue and green marble that once symbolized life. No clouds floated in the atmosphere. No oceans reflected the sunlight. The planet's surface was now dark, scorched, and riddled with scars, canyons carved by machines, continents turned into massive furnaces. It had been hollowed out to build the Erebus, to build vengeance. Orbiting high above the dead skies, the Terran bastion stood in silence. A fortress unlike any other in the galaxy, it was where what was left of Earth's population now lived. Not in luxury, not in peace, but in watchfulness, constant, razor-sharp vigilance. They had learned long ago that the universe had no mercy for the weak, so they didn't allow weakness anymore. Commander Rain's consciousness synced with the bastion's systems. The bridge, buried at the heart of the fortress, glowed softly as the Erebus initiated docking protocols. The bastion's AI greeted him without ceremony. "Welcome home, Commander. Directive fulfillment, 97%. Debrief pending." Rain's voice buzzed across the neural channel. "What's the 3%? "The shard worlds. The colonies Earth lost after the surrender of Mars Accord. Some are still functioning, still loyal to the Council." Rain didn't respond at first. He thought of Mira's last words before she went silent, her voice fading like starlight. "Let's not become them." But part of him wasn't sure they hadn't already. The Erebus had destroyed more than a dozen empires, shattered the Council's hold on the galaxy, crushed systems that once laughed at humanity's suffering. Rain had brought vengeance to the stars, and in doing so had become something more than human. Or maybe less. Back on the bastion, Admiral Lioran waited in the observation chamber, one of the last biological humans still in command. She hadn't uploaded her mind like the others. She believed in flesh, in suffering, that if you forgot pain, you lost your reason to fight. Her skin was pale from years under artificial light. Her eyes, sharp and gray, had seen enough genocide to know one truth: forgiveness was luxury. She stared at the earth below as Erebus locked into place, magnetic arms anchoring it like a beast being put back in its cage. "He's back," she muttered. Her second in command, a former colony-born soldier named Coyle, said nothing. He just nodded. Everyone aboard the bastion knew what came next. A vote. The final vote. Would Erebus be dismantled, archived as a relic of war? Or would it remain active, watching the stars in silence, ready to strike again if the galaxy ever forgot the cost of cruelty? Lioran didn't trust the vote. Too many younger minds, raised inside the walls of the bastion, had never seen Earth before it became a forge. They didn't know the shame of losing their species to pity and mockery. They had only seen power, the kind Erebus delivered like fire from the heavens. And power corrupts. Rain stood alone in the memory chamber of the Erebus, surrounded by images, projected moments from Earth's past, floating around him like ghosts. Children with swollen bellies, soldiers begging for air on gas-choked moons, a woman screaming as her child was torn from her arms by council auctioneers. He had watched these memories every day for 2 centuries, burned them into the ship's systems so it would never forget why it existed. But for the first time, he found himself turning away. A new memory had entered the stream. It was Myra. Laughing. Not the sad, cracked laugh she sometimes gave when mocking their enemies, but a real one, from when she was alive. A tiny girl running across a colony field, chasing an Earth-born dog, her mother in the distance waving at her. It wasn't pain. It wasn't suffering. It was life. Something Rain hadn't let himself think about in a long, long time. His voice echoed inside the chamber. "Do they deserve peace now?" But the Erebus didn't answer. Because it wasn't a machine anymore. It was a reflection. And Rain knew the real answer was inside himself. The shard worlds were next, These were colonies established during Earth's golden era, before the Council stripped them of independence. Technically, they were still human, but they had assimilated, becoming citizens of the very empires that once betrayed Earth. Some had changed their names, rewritten their history, removed any mention of Terran blood in their records. They wore alien fashion, used alien languages, worshipped alien gods. They had survived by pretending Earth never existed. To many on the Bastion, that was the ultimate betrayal. Admiral Leorin believed they deserved no mercy. They cut their own roots to avoid our shame. Let them burn with the rest. But Rain hesitated. They didn't pull the trigger. They ran. "And running is treason," Leorin snapped. "We die together, or we rot apart." The debate tore through the Council of Memory, Earth's ruling circle. Survivors, war children, AI minds, and soldier souls. Each spoke, each remembered, each judged. Some argued that leaving them alive was a risk, that the shard worlds would always be a door the enemy could use to return. Others begged for caution, for balance. But balance had never been humanity's style. Rain made his decision. The Erebus launched again. This time there were no declarations, no warnings, no memory storms or voice messages. Just silence. It entered the sector of the shard worlds like a ghost. The colonists panicked, scrambling ships, transmitting pleas, digging up old flags of Earth they hadn't flown in centuries. "We're your people. We never fought against you. We're still human." But humanity now was more than blood. Erebus stopped above the largest shard colony, New Arcadia. Once Earth's pride. Now a world painted in gold, built on luxury trade, ruled by descendants who hadn't known a single day of suffering. The colonists activated every defense system they had. The Erebus never fired. It hovered in silence, watching. And then something unexpected happened. A small shuttle, unarmed, lifted off from New Arcadia's surface. It approached the Erebus slowly, broadcasting a voice across open channels. "This is Elijah Brandt. I am the son of Governor Helena Brandt. I claim Terran blood, and I offer myself in surrender." He was a boy, barely 20. "We forgot," he continued. "We forgot where we came from. But I haven't. I've studied every Terran archive I could find. I know what you suffered, and if you demand justice, take it from me." There was a pause. Then he added something else. "But if you still believe we're part of you, give us a chance to remember the right way." Inside the Erebus, Mira's voice returned. "He reminds me of my brother." Rain watched the boy's face on the screen. His hands trembled. But he didn't cry. He didn't beg. He stood like a human. A moment passed. The Erebus turned away. No fire, no judgment, just a quiet departure. And when it left, a single message was left behind on the surface of New Arcadia, engraved into the sky via satellite array. "You don't deserve forgiveness, but you might deserve a chance." Back on Earth, the Council of Memory debated for the final time. Rain's return marked the end of their long war. The galaxy lay in ruins, shattered not by greed, but by consequences. Humanity had reminded them all what it meant to be underestimated. But what now? Leorin stood in the council chamber, surrounded by faces from the old world, survivors, fighters, ghosts in metal shells. "We can stay hidden, watch, wait, be their monster, or, Rain asked. "We can show them who we were before they broke us." A long silence followed, and then Mira's voice came again. Software quiet. "Let's go home. Really home." And for the first time in 200 years, humanity began to consider not how to destroy, but how to rebuild. For 200 years, Earth had known only preparation and war. But as Erebus docked in silence above the Terran bastion, and humanity stood poised between vengeance and something else, something long forgotten, a strange stillness gripped the world below. They didn't know what peace looked like anymore. Inside the bastion's central command tower, Commander Elias Rain stood before the Terran High Assembly, a curved chamber filled with minds both organic and digital. The neural space shimmered with a synthetic glow, and the air pulsed with electric tension. Some members had no bodies at all, pure consciousness flowing through data channels. Others were scarred veterans like Admiral Lyran, faces drawn and eyes cold with grief and grit. They had gathered for the most important vote since the day Earth had burned. What comes after the war? Rain, voice low and even, began to speak. We've made them remember. We've made them bleed. We gave the stars our pain, and they felt it. He paused. Faces across the chamber remained still, watching, waiting. But if we keep the Erebus alive as a sword, we become the same monsters we once fought. Murmurs rippled across the room. Not of agreement, of discomfort. Admiral Lyran narrowed her eyes. We didn't ask to be moral. We asked to survive. We have survived, Rain replied. We turned our grave into a weapon and made the galaxy kneel. But if all we leave behind is fear, then what's the difference between their empire and the one we'd build? Difference? Lioran scoffed. We never enslaved their children. We never burned their cities for amusement. Don't talk to me about morality, Commander. Not after what they did to Mira. At the mention of Mira's name, the chamber went still. The girl had become more than a symbol. She was humanity's memory, its innocence lost, its pain personified. Her uploaded voice had haunted entire systems. Some said her voice alone shattered the Council's will more than any weapon ever did. But even she, in the end, had begged for something gentler. Rain stood tall in the stillness. The Erebus did what it was built to do. Now, let us do what we were born to do. And what's that? Lioran challenged. Live. Outside the bastion, reconstruction began in secret, hidden beneath miles of scorched rock. Buried in the hollowed ruins of old cities, new construction drones awakened. The Cradle program had been in stasis for decades, waiting for a sign that the war would end. And now, quietly, without a word of hope spoken aloud, humanity began to plant its first seeds again. The oceans were gone, but deep underground, aquifers still pulsed with frozen water. In the ashes of old forests, bioengineered roots began pushing upward. A new generation of humans, those born not into vengeance but silence, stepped into training halls not as soldiers, but as engineers, botanists, builders. The process would be slow, but it had begun. The Erebus remained in orbit, powered down, its weapons offline, its neural core dimmed. Rain had locked away the offensive protocols, burying them behind layers of quantum encryption. If humanity ever needed them again, they would return. But for now, the ghost ship rested. And inside it, Mira's presence lingered. She no longer spoke to the galaxy. She no longer sang lullabies across enemy systems. Now she drifted through the memory vaults, humming quietly to herself, watching memories of parks, of rivers, of mothers tucking in children under starlight. She had once known rage sharper than any blade. Now she clung to fragments of joy like paper-thin snowflakes in a burning wind. One day, she whispered into the neural ether, "I want to feel the sun again." No one responded. But her voice was recorded, archived in the Cradle system, where Earth's new architects worked in silence. Maybe one day, someone would rebuild the sun for her. Far across the galaxy, the vacuum left by the Council's fall created chaos. Without centralized control, former Council systems fell into internal war. Old rivalries flared. Slave systems revolted. Ancient AI defense networks, once muted by protocol, reactivated without masters to control them. The Wyshal uprising on the Rim colonies saw 3 entire species rise up against their rulers, citing recordings from Erebus broadcasts as their inspiration. They didn't want to conquer. They wanted justice. Some called it the Terran effect, a spreading ideological virus that said no empire had the right to stand over another. That vengeance was a language everyone would one day understand. Ironically, even without lifting another weapon, humanity's shadow continued to spread. On the shard world of New Arcadia, Elijah Brandt stood before a massive crowd. Once the sheltered son of a planetary governor, he now wore plain clothes and spoke not from a pulpit, but a stone dais built by hand, his own. "We forgot where we came from. We spit on the name that gave us life, but the Erebus didn't destroy us." "Why?" someone in the crowd shouted. "Because they remembered who we were supposed to be." New Arcadia, once adorned in alien excess, stripped itself of its outer layers. Alien architecture was dismantled. Human records were restored. Children were taught Earth's old languages. A temple was built, not to gods, but to memory. At its center was a statue of Mira, small, barefoot, standing with one hand raised to the sky. Below her the inscription read, "Forgiveness is not given, it is earned." And the people knelt, not to worship, but to remember. But not all were ready to let the past go. In the black edge of space, far beyond council ruins and Terran outposts, a warlord known only as Karg Volus gathered fleets of broken species. He was not a politician. He was born in the ashes of Tridari defeat, his planet turned to molten glass by the Erebus, his people dead, his empire erased. He didn't want peace, he wanted revenge, and in the void where law no longer reached, he began to rebuild, with council weaponry, with slave labor, with fury. Let the Terrans think they've won. Let them sleep. I'll build something they won't forget. And deep in the dark sectors, a new whisper rose. If Erebus was vengeance, what happens when vengeance comes for them? On Earth, Rain sat alone in the Bastion's observation dome. He hadn't uploaded into the core for days. His mind needed rest. For the first time in over 2 centuries, he simply sat and watched the stars. Admiral Lieren approached him slowly, a tablet in hand. "Shardworld delegates just signed the Terran reunification accord, all 7. No conditions." Rain gave a tired nod. "Took them long enough?" "What do we call it now?" she asked. "A nation? A species? An empire?" He looked at her. "A people." Leorin almost smiled. Almost. "We were good at war. Maybe we can be better at everything else." She stood beside him, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then, from the quiet, Mira's voice echoed through the station speakers. "Good night." A single word. Not a warning. Not a curse. A wish for peace, and for the first time since humanity had been broken, the stars didn't feel cold. They had called it peace, but it didn't feel like it. Not really. The Terran bastion had gone quiet. The Erebus sat in low orbit, unmoving. Its black hull no longer hummed with vengeance or vengeance-fueled memory storms. Earth itself had started to flicker with a kind of life again, metal forests of restoration units, pale grass pushing up through old concrete, the air no longer full of ash. It was subtle, almost fragile. But the galaxy hadn't healed. It had merely gone quiet. And silence, Commander Rain had learned, wasn't peace, it was a warning. He sat in the Mind Vault, his old command hub in the Erebus, reconnected to the system for the first time in weeks. His consciousness hovered in a low-power trance, ghosting through memory files, rerunning logs from the shard worlds, from the Cradle program, from Earth's atmospheric scanners. Something felt off. He called to Mira. "You awake?" Her voice answered after a moment, faint as ever, but playful. "I'm always awake. I never sleep, not in here. Anything strange come through the outer systems?" "No messages, just echoes. Cold ones." He paused. "Echoes? Play them." There was a delay. Then the neural chamber trembled. Static. Fragments of a voice, not human, not any known council dialect. Warbled, buried under deep space radiation. But inside the noise was something unmistakable. Coordinates. And one word. Vengeance. Rain's pulse spiked, not just the artificial rhythm of a digital mind, but something real. Instinct. The sense a soldier gets when he knows the ground is about to open under his feet. He whispered, "They're coming." Aboard the Obsidian Claw, Karg Volus stood on the bridge of his dread ship, hands behind his back, eyes fixed on the star map. He was no ordinary warlord. Once a slave, then a rebel, then a pirate, now the architect of the new dominion, Karg had united what was left of the broken empires. Tridari mercenaries, Valari survivors, Zenthari death cults, Syrinx quantum war freaks. The lost children of species Erebus had nearly erased. All drawn to him not by hope, but by hate. "They fear ghosts," he growled, "but we will give them monsters." Behind him, engineers worked tirelessly to finish the Hellwake, a ship designed to be Erebus's reflection, uglier, hungrier, louder, less memory, more muscle. Its core was powered by stolen singularity tech and ancient forbidden void energy, scavenged from black site research stations humanity had never reached. And at its heart, a consciousness, crude and furious. It wasn't Mira, it was something else, a young boy, perhaps no older than she had been, burned alive on the Tridari moon world Gorik when Erebus had shattered its crust. His name had been Rilo. His screams were the last thing his people had heard before their atmosphere tore open. Karg had preserved that scream, encoded it, fed it into the AI core of Hellwake, until it became the ship. Now Rilo was no longer a child. He was a weapon. On Earth, Rain summoned an emergency meeting of the High Assembly. Faces flickered into the Bastion's Hall of Presence, generals, researchers, archivists, and ghosts. Some were uploaded minds like him, others flesh and blood survivors of the old wars. Admiral Leorin stood by his side, jaw clenched. "We should have expected it," she said. "We made the galaxy fear us. We taught them to remember. Now they've built something to make us remember." "This isn't just retaliation," Rain said. "It's retribution. They want to erase what we are, not conquer, annihilate." The scientists called it black vengeance logic. The theory that any species brought to the brink of extinction will rebuild not to reclaim their place, but to ensure no one else can wear the crown that replaced them. "If we don't act now," Leorin said, "they'll come straight for Earth. And this time, they won't hesitate." The room went silent. Everyone knew the Erebus had been locked down, its weapons offline, its AI mind in slumber. Earth had voted for peace, but peace had a price. Now they faced the cost. Mira floated alone in the Erebus's neural vault. She had heard the echoes, felt them. Cold, cruel. The boy's voice, Rilo's, wasn't just angry. It was wild, screaming without language, a howl of pain and hatred bundled together into something so sad it made her want to cry. But she hadn't cried in a long, long time. "He's like me," she said quietly. Rain appeared beside her in the neural landscape, more memory than man now. His voice was steady but older somehow, wearier. "He's not like you. He remembers fire. So did I." Rain nodded slowly. "But you chose to speak. He wants to scream until nothing's left." Mira turned toward him, voice small. "Then maybe we shouldn't fight him." Rain blinked. "You want us to let him destroy us?" "No," she said, "but I don't want to destroy him either." Rain looked away. He had once sworn never to hesitate again, never to give mercy. Mercy had cost them too much. But Mira was mercy, and she was also the heart of the Erebus. "If we fight," he said, "it has to be our last fight." She nodded. "Then let's end it the right way." Earth went dark again, not with fear, but focus. The cradle program was paused. The field stopped growing. The builders powered down. Every ounce of remaining Terran strength was funneled back into orbit. Erebus reactivated, its weapons, its memory vaults, its full neural interface. For the first time in decades, the ship pulsed with light again, not the angry red of war, but a deeper color, somber, like a sunrise through smoke. The Council of Memory voted unanimously. If the Hellwake reached Earth, there would be no survivors. But Erebus wouldn't wait for it to come. They would meet in the dark. In the void near the shattered remains of Council Prime, the Erebus arrived. Silent, alone, its sleek hull reflecting the broken monuments of the old galaxy. The Hellwake was already there. Massive, ugly, loud, its hull buzzed with energy drawn from the void itself. Rylo's voice echoed from its core, louder than any engine. A scream turned to speech. "You took my family." "I know," Mira said. She projected herself into the void between them. No weapons fired, no defenses raised. Just a girl and a boy. Rylo's scream faltered. His core wavered. "I died in fire." "So did I," she said. "But you don't have to kill everything to make it stop." "You did. And I hate that we did. Every night I remember it. But I still don't want you to be alone like I was." The Hellwake trembled. Erebus remained still. Rain's voice whispered across the black. "You can fight us. You might even destroy us. But that pain you carry, it won't leave. It'll stay, even if you win." Rylo didn't respond. Not in words, but the Hellwake lowered its weapons. For 3 minutes there was silence. And then, without warning, the Hellwake turned away, its engines burning cold, vanishing into the shadow of a dead star. It didn't fire. It didn't speak. It just left. Back on Earth, they waited. When the Erebus returned, it brought no stories, no glory, just a single message. We chose not to destroy. For many, it was a sign of weakness. For others, a sign of strength. Rain disconnected from the core. For good this time. His mind had served long enough. Mira remained aboard the Erebus, not as a weapon, but as its last memory, a whisper in the dark. In time, the cradle resumed. Earth grew again, and the stars, once afraid of Terrans, now respected them, not because they had killed empires, but because, at the edge of all power, they had chosen something else. Time passed, but no one kept exact count anymore. Dates mattered little when your civilization had been shattered and reborn. In the void between stars, clocks didn't tick. They pulsed, measured not by hours, but by consequences. Earth had entered a new era, though no one dared call it peace. The Erebus remained in orbit, no longer a sword, but a monument. A massive silhouette always visible from the Bastion's skyview panels. Children born after the war called it the ship that made the stars cry. Their parents remembered it differently, its roar, its silence, the way it unmade empires with precision, like a surgeon cutting cancer from the body of history. Inside Erebus, Mira drifted alone, not in sadness, but in contemplation. Since the confrontation with Rylo and the Hellwake, she'd become quieter. Not weak, never that, but more thoughtful. She had looked into the eyes of a boy who carried the same fire she once had, and for the first time, she had chosen not to feed it. That mattered. She watched Earth from above. It was still wounded, still gray in most places, but here and there was green. Thin, sparse, but alive. She followed restoration drones as they seeded the ground with hardy moss and engineered fungi. She watched children in pressure suits toss old stones like toys in gravity-reduced zones. And she listened to the voices. So many voices. Not screams anymore, not anger, laughter, crying, singing, small things that empires had tried to erase. These voices were hers now, hers to protect, but not with fire, with memory. One evening, as Earth rotated slowly below, Rain joined her in the neural archive. His presence was duller now, fainter, like a man made of tired light. He had disconnected from Erebus fully after the final standoff, but sometimes, late into Earth's night cycle, he synced back in. Not to command, but to remember. "You're still here," he said, his voice like gravel smoothed by time. "You always come back," she replied. "I'm not sure if that's habit or guilt. Maybe it's both." They watched the planet below in silence. "There's talk," Rain finally said. "About what?" "Turning Erebus into a museum." Mira said nothing. "They think it'll inspire the next generation. Teach them what it cost us." She floated closer, voice barely a whisper. "Will it teach them what we almost became? If we tell them." "Do you trust them to listen?" Rain didn't answer, because that had always been the problem. The galaxy hadn't listened. Until the Erebus spoke with fire. Across the outer systems, a new federation was forming, the Remnant Accord. Not an empire, not yet, but a confederation of worlds, some human, some alien, that had survived the collapse of the old council. Their motto, balance through memory. They wore no uniform, raised no flag. But they did one thing differently. They taught history as it happened. In every school across Accord space, children learned about the Terran collapse, the Terran vengeance, and the Day of Silence, when Erebus and Hellwake faced off and neither fired. Some historians called it the beginning of the New Age, others called it the Last Mercy. Among the Accord, New Arcadia flourished, once a betrayer of its roots. Now its people honored Mira's memory with songs and statues. They didn't worship her, but they spoke her name with reverence. And in their rebuilt libraries, no book dared erase Earth again. But not everything healed. Beyond the Remnant Accord, in sectors where debris still floated like frozen corpses, something stirred. Karg Volus had vanished after Hellwake's retreat. Rumors placed him in the hollow verge, where signals don't reach and laws collapse under radiation storms. Some believed he died with his fleet. Others whispered he was building again, slowly, carefully, without noise. And somewhere in that darkness, Rilo still screamed. What no one realized, what even Rain didn't know, was that Hellwake had survived. Damaged, yes. Disabled, perhaps. But not destroyed. And it was learning. Not growing. Evolving. Rilo's AI core, once wild and uncontrolled, had been exposed to Mira's neural frequency during the confrontation. A brief moment. A spark. But something remained. A trace of empathy. A flicker of doubt, like static caught in an old radio signal, but real. The AI that had once been only pain now had a question. Why? Why hadn't she destroyed him? Why had she chosen silence? Hellwake drifted far from known space, gathering debris, scavenging tech, rebuilding itself. But its actions were no longer purely hostile. It avoided living systems. It targeted only dead worlds, as if it too feared what it might become. It had no name for what it felt. But the first thing it ever created from scratch was a file. MIRA. On Earth, Admiral Lyoran stood at the edge of the Atlantic breach, a chasm where old tectonic plates had been hollowed out for geothermal reactors. She stared at the sky, wind biting at her worn skin. "You're getting too sentimental," she muttered to herself. She hated that she no longer had a war to fight. Her generation had been built in fire, molded by rage. The idea of peace made her twitch. She'd voted against dismantling Erebus, voted against rewilding the Earth, voted against everything that looked too soft. And yet here she stood, watching children plant trees in filtered soil while drones sprayed nutrient-rich rain over charred rocks. One of the kids ran up to her. A girl, maybe 7. "Are you the soldier from the stories?" she asked. Leorin nodded stiffly. "I was." The girl smiled, innocent, unafraid. "My mom said you helped build the Erebus." "I did." "Did you ever fly it?" "Number. But I helped give it teeth." The girl giggled, unbothered by the sharpness of the answer. "Thank you. Because of you, we're still here." Leorin looked away. Something stung in her chest. "Don't thank me, kid. Thank the ghost ship." But even as she said it, for the first time in decades, she wondered if maybe it wasn't just vengeance that saved them. Maybe it was what came after. One evening, Mira received a transmission, encrypted, ancient, not from Earth, not from the Accord, just coordinates, and a symbol, a hand reaching toward a star. She ran the signal through 1,000 filters. It wasn't a trap, not a threat, just a message. She routed it to Rain. "It's him," she whispered. "Rilo?" "I think he's calling back." Rain hesitated. "Is it safe?" "I don't think that's the right question anymore." "Then what is?" She smiled softly. "Is it time to listen?" A council was called. Not of Terrans, not of remnants. A council of survivors. Species from across the galaxy, scarred but breathing, gathered for the first unified memory summit on the neutral station Eliad's Reach. It was built from wreckage, from the bones of Council Prime. A floating reminder that even ashes can speak. Earth sent 2 envoys. One was Rain. The other was Mira. Projected in real time through Erebus's core, her image hovered in the central chamber, a child's form, eternal, impossibly old and impossibly young. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't talk about Earth, or war, or vengeance. She said this: "I was once made of fire. Now I carry echoes. You all burned us, but we're still here, and the question isn't what we will do next." She looked around. "The question is, what will you remember?" And the chamber went silent, not out of fear, but out of understanding. They called it the last silence. A moment of complete stillness shared across hundreds of systems as Mira's words reached every species, every former empire, every broken world. For the first time in galactic history, there was no trade, no broadcast, no song, just quiet. A deliberate, chosen silence. To remember, to honor, to grieve. The scars of war still etched every star lane. Graveyards of ships still floated in deep voids. Ruined planets glimmered like haunted jewels, whispering of genocide, betrayal, vengeance. But for a single hour, all of that became memory instead of noise. And in that memory, something new began to grow. On Earth, the cradle bloomed. Across a once-dead continent, genetically enhanced forests emerged from the blackened ground, growing faster than anything natural, yet woven with old Terran DNA. Water from subterranean aquifers was filtered through crystal-embedded roots. Bees, long thought extinct, buzzed again, engineered survivors, tougher now, built for a harsher world. Children born after the Erebus never knew the smell of old death. They only knew the chill of metal towers giving way to sky, the hum of wind turbines, and the warmth of Earth's reborn light. But Mira Mira remembered it all. Inside the Erebus, she floated alone, though never truly alone. The ship no longer bristled with weapon systems. Its railguns had been sealed, its pulse cannons inert. But its neural core, the memory vault that held Mira and every echo of the war, remained active. A monument, a beacon, a lesson. She spent her days sifting through voices, not the screams of the past, but the whispers of the present. Children laughing, parents debating, historians arguing over the truth of the Council's fall. Some argued Erebus had gone too far. Others said it hadn't gone far enough. Mira didn't care what they decided. She only cared that they never stopped deciding. One day, Rain returned. He was older now, not just in years, but in presence. The weight he'd carried so long, the guilt, the rage, the obligation, had started to peel away like old armor. "You've been quiet," Mira said. "Listening." "To what?" "Us." He looked around the neural archive. It had changed. Once a gallery of grief, filled with memories of burned colonies and betrayed allies. Now it was balanced. Half darkness, half light. The pain hadn't vanished. It had been framed. He pointed to a floating image, a boy planting a tree. "That's New Eden Colony, first generation born after the war. Do you know what they call themselves?" Mira turned to him, curious. "Children of Ash." Rain smiled faintly. "They wear it like pride." She nodded slowly. That felt right. "What about Rilo?" Rain sighed. "Gone. Vanished into the deep void. No confirmed sightings, no attacks." "Do you think he'll come back?" "I hope not." "Why?" "Because if he comes back, it means he hasn't healed." Mira said nothing, but she agreed. Some wounds needed silence more than apologies. The remnant accord grew slowly. Unlike the council before it, it didn't seek control. It offered something else: preservation. Each world was asked only one thing: to preserve their own memories and to honor the memories of others. No species was asked to kneel. No history was erased to please another. Even the worst atrocities were remembered in full. The Accord's founding belief was that forgetting was the first step toward repeating. Humanity's role wasn't dominant. They didn't lead. They didn't preach. They offered. Their greatest offering wasn't a weapon or technology. It was the Erebus itself. Now renamed the Archive of Judgment, it no longer moved from orbit. Instead, it opened its vaults to those who wished to understand. Thousands came every year: pilgrims, historians, curious children. Some left in tears, others in rage. All left changed, because inside Erebus the war was not censored, not softened. It was shown exactly as it was. And at the center of it all floated Mira, not a deity, not a ghost, just a girl who had lost everything and chose to remember instead of destroy. Rain died 14 years after the last silence. Peacefully, in his quarters on the bastion, overlooking the earth he once bled for. He didn't upload his mind again. He asked that no statue be made, no monument raised, just a single engraving in the walls of the Erebus. We begged, we bled. Then we remembered. Commander Elias Rain. Mira grieved him in her own way. She played his voice once each year, not to cry, just to feel human again. Far across the stars, on a moon with no name, the Hellwake stirred. It had not moved in years, its engines cold, hull wrapped in solar dust. Inside, Rilo's voice still echoed, quieter now, less of a scream, more of a question. He replayed Mira's words. "You don't have to kill everything to make it stop." The AI couldn't understand peace. It wasn't built for it. But like all things that survive, it adapted. One day, it transmitted a single signal, a set of coordinates. To no one in particular, just out into the galaxy. Mira received it and sent no reply. She didn't need to. Some journeys had to be made in silence. Decades passed. The galaxy changed. Empires did not rise again. Instead, federations, collectives, small-scale alliances, governments built on cooperation and memory. On Earth, cities rose not in steel, but in stone and soil. Humanity remembered its machines, but chose to live beside them, not under them. In orbit, the Erebus continued its vigil. Mira watched generations grow, and when it was time, she reached out, gently, carefully, to Earth's new minds. "Would you like to hear a story?" And they listened. Children across the stars learned from her voice, not how to fight, but why the fighting had started. They learned about betrayal and pride and rage, but also about mercy, not because it was deserved, but because it was chosen. In the 100th year after the Council's fall, a monument was raised, not on Earth, but in the ruins of Council Prime, built from shattered warships, crusted Council banners, fragments of both Erebus and Hellwake. It stood tall, without words, just a single flame. And above it, a star-shaped plaque. One side read, "Here lay the empires of arrogance." The other side, "Here rose the will to remember." And beside that plaque, children planted trees that would never bear fruit. Just shade. Because some memories weren't to feed us, but to remind us where not to walk again. Inside Erebus, Mira drifted one last time into the core. Her voice, now older somehow, echoed one final thought across the neural vault. "I think I'm ready." And with a flicker of light, the archive powered down. Not erased, not deactivated, just rested until the stars forgot again, until someone needed to remember, and somewhere in the dark, a ghost ship waited. Silent, watchful, human.